Autobiography of Parley P. Pratt, Chapter 21. In April 1838, I took leave of New York and with a small colony immigrated once more to Missouri. We settled in Caldwell County in May. Here I again commenced anew, built a house and made a farm. I also devoted much of my time to the ministry. I visited many different neighborhoods and was everywhere received with hospitality and listened to with interest and attention. On the 4th of July, 1838, thousands of the citizens who belonged to the Church of the Saints assembled at the city of Far West, the county seat of Caldwell, in order to celebrate our nation's birth. We erected a tall standard on which was hoisted our national colors, the stars and stripes and the bald eagle of the American liberty. Under its waving folds we laid the cornerstone of a temple of God and dedicated the land and ourselves and families to Him who had preserved us in all our troubles. An address was then delivered by Sidney Rigdon, in which was portrayed in lively colors the oppression that we had suffered at the hands of our enemies. We then and there declared our constitutional rights as American citizens and manifested our determination to resist, with our utmost endeavors from that time forth, all oppression, and to maintain our rights and our freedom according to the holy principles of liberty, as guaranteed to every person by the Constitution and laws of our country. This declaration was received with shouts of Hosanna to God and the Lamb, and with many long cheers. By the assembled thousands, who were determined to yield their rights no more unless compelled by superior power. Soon after these things, the war clouds began again to lower with darkness and threatening aspect. Those who had combined against the law in the adjoining counties had long watched our increasing power and prosperity with jealousy and with greedy and avaricious eyes. It was a common boast that, as soon as we had completed our extensive improvements and made a plentiful crop, they would drive us from the state and once more enrich themselves with the spoils. Accordingly, at an election held in Daviess County, a portion of these bandits undertook to prevent the members of the Church of the Saints from voting, forcing them from the poll box and threatening to kill whoever should attempt to vote. As some voters were attacked, they defended themselves, knocked down several of their opponents, gained the victory, and cast in their votes. This was a pretext for a general rising of the insurrectionists in all the adjoining counties. They were alarmed for fear the Mormons, as they called them, should become so formidable as to maintain their rights and liberties, insomuch that they could no more drive and plunder them. Public meetings were held in Coral, Saline, and other counties, in which resolutions were passed and published, openly declaring the treasonable and murderous intention of driving the citizens belonging to the Church from their counties and, if possible, from the state. Resolutions to this effect were published in the Journal of Upper Missouri, and this without a single remark of disapprobation. Nay, more, this murderous gang, when assembled in arms and painted like Indian warriors, and when openly committing murder, robbery, house burning, and every crime known to the laws, were denominated citizens, whites, etiquette, in most of the journals of the state, while those who stood firm to the laws of the land and only defended themselves and their homes and country were denominated Mormons, in contradistinction to the appellation of citizens, whites, etiquette, as if we had been some savage tribe or some colored race of foreigners. In pursuance of the resolutions thus passed and published, a formidable host of bandits was soon assembled under arms to the amount of several hundred, and rendezvoused in Daviess County. Here they commenced firing upon our citizens, plundering and taking peaceable citizens prisoners. The people of the church made no resistance except to assemble on their own ground for defense. They also made oath before the district judge, Austin A. King, to the above outrages. 1,000 men were then ordered into service under the command of Major General Atchison and Brigadier General Parks and Donovan. These marched to Daviess County and remained in service 30 days, but judging from the result, they had no intention of coming in contact with the mob, but only to make a show of defending one neighborhood while the mob were allowed to attack another. The gang now withdrew from Daviess County and proceeded to DeWitt, Corral County. Here they laid siege for several days and subsisted by plunder and robbery, watching every opportunity to fire upon our citizens. At this time, they had one or more pieces of artillery in addition to small arms and ammunition in abundance. A Presbyterian priest, Reverend Sachel Woods, served as chaplain to the gang and said prayers in the camp evening and morning. They succeeded in killing a number of citizens in and about DeWitt. They also turned a gentleman named Smith Humphrey and his wife and children out of doors when sick and set fire to the house, burned it to ashes before their eyes. At length, they succeeded in driving every citizen from the place, at the sacrifice of everything that they could not take with them. This happened during a cold, stormy time in October, and as many of the citizens were sickly and robbed of shelter and everything comfortable, they came near perishing. Some of them, in fact, did perish before they arrived in Caldwell, a distance of 60 miles. Here the survivors were hospitably taken in by their brethren. The militia, under General Parks, made some show of trying to prevent these outrages, but all in vain. At length the general informed the citizens that his forces were too small, and many of them so much in favor of the insurrectionists, that it was useless to look any longer to them for protection. Several messages were also sent to the governor, Lilburn W. Boggs, the old mob leader, imploring protection, but he was utterly deaf to everything that called for protection of the Mormons, as he called us. But, on the contrary, he hearkened to the insinuations of the mob, which were without shadow of foundation. At one time, he called out an army and put himself at their head to march against the Mormons, but as he approached the upper county with his formidable force of several thousand men, he was officially notified that the Mormons were not in a state of insurrection, but were the victims of those who were so, and that they needed his help. His Excellency then disbanded his forces and returned to Jefferson City to await till the mobs should compel the Mormons to some act which might be considered illegal, which would give him some pretext to drive them from the state. After evacuation of DeWitt, when our citizens were officially notified that they must protect themselves and expect no more protection from any department of the state government, they assembled in Far West to the number of 1,000 men or thereabout, and resolved to defend their rights to the last. A call was made upon every person who could bear arms to come forward in defense of our houses, homes, wives, and children, and the cause of our country and our God. In the meantime, the bandits, elated with success and emboldened by the negligence of every department of the state government, were increasing in numbers daily. They were concentrating in Daviess County with artillery and military stores, with open threats that they would now drive the citizens from Daviess and Caldwell counties. In their marauding expeditions, they took a number of citizens prisoners. Among these was Mr. Amasa Lyman, a minister of the gospel and an excellent citizen of Caldwell County. They kept him prisoner for a number of days, while his family was in suspense and knew not his fate. They abused him in various ways and held frequent consultations to kill him, but at length he was set at liberty. The people of Daviess County assembled several hundred men for defense. Several parties of the bandits were met, disarmed, and dispersed. A detachment under Colonel D. Patton marched against their main body with a posse of about 100 men, met and dispersed them, with a loss of their artillery and some military store. Another party was dispelled and disarmed by the sheriff of Caldwell County and his posse as they were on the march through that county to reinforce the bandits of Daviess. While these transactions were going on, small parties of our enemy were busily engaged among the settlements in plundering and burning houses, driving women and children from their homes to perish with hunger and cold, and robbing them of beds, bedding, furniture, wearing apparel, etiquette. Hundreds were thus compelled to flee to the cities and strongholds. Many women and children came in at the dead hours of the night and in the midst of dreadful storms of rain and snow, and in which they came near perishing. While these things were transpiring in Daviess, Caldwell was threatened from every quarter. Her citizens were driven from her frontiers and came pouring into the town of Far West from day to day with women, children, goods, provisions. In short, with everything movable which they had time to bring. Lands and crops were abandoned to the enemies. Citizens were under arms from day to day, and a strict military guard was maintained every night. Men slept in their clothes, with arms by their sides and ready to muster at the given signal at any hour of the night. During this state of alarm, guns were fired and signal drums beat. In the middle of a dark and gloomy night in October, the citizens came running together with arms in hand. An express had arrived from the south part of the county, stating that a party of the enemy was plundering houses, carrying off prisoners, killing cattle, and ordering families out of their houses on pain of having them burned over their heads. A portion of the militia under Captain Durfee went with a deputy sheriff to the scene of the riot. I was on the posse, and the whole consisting of about 60 men. This company was soon under way, having to ride through extensive prairies, a distance of some 12 miles. The night was dark. The distant plains, far and wide, were illuminated by blazing fires. Immense columns of smoke were seen rising in awful majesty, as if the world were on fire. This scene of grandeur can only be comprehended by those acquainted with scenes of prairie burning, as the fire sweeps over millions of acres of dry grass in the fall season and leaves a smooth black surface devastated of all vegetation. The thousand meteors blazing in the distance, like the campfires of some war host, threw a fitful gleam of light upon distant sky, which many might have mistaken for the aurora borealis. This scene added to the silence of moonlight the rumbling sound of the tramping steeds over the hard and dried surface of the plain, the clanking of swords in their scabbards, the occasional gleam of bright arms in the flickering firelight, the gloom of surrounding darkness, and the unknown destiny of the expedition, or even of the people who sent it forth, all combined to impress the mind with deep and solemn thoughts, and to throw a romantic vision over the imagination, which is not often experienced except in the poet's dreams or in the wild imagery of sleeping fancy. In this solemn procession we moved on for some 2 hours, when it was supposed we were in the neighborhood of danger. We were then ordered to dismount and leave our horses with a guard. This done, we proceeded on foot for a mile or two in search of the enemy. We had not proceeded far when we entered the wilderness. We had not proceeded far as we entered the wilderness. As we entered the wilderness, we were suddenly fired upon by an unknown enemy in ambush. One of our little number fell at the first fire, being mortally wounded. His name was O'Banion. At a short distance we could now behold the campfires of the enemy. It was now dawn of day in the eastern horizon, but darkness still hovered over the scene of conflict. Orders were issued to form in the brush and under cover of trees, which was instantly done. The fire now became general on both sides. The whole wilderness seemed one continued echo of the report of the deadly fire. After a few rounds of discharge, orders were given to charge the enemy in the camp. As we rushed upon them, the strife became deadly and several fell on both sides. At this instant, a ball pierced the brave Colonel David Patton, who was then at my side, and I saw him fall. Being on the eve of victory, I dared not stop to look after his fate or that of others, but rushed into the enemy's camp. This was located on the immediate banks of Crooked River, which was here several rods wide and not fordable. The enemy, being hard pushed, flung themselves into the stream and struggled for the other shore. Those who reached it soon disappeared. The firing now ceased, and the wilderness resounded with the watchword, God and liberty. Our little band, which had been thrown into some disorder, was instantly formed, and their pieces reloaded. This done, a detachment surveyed the field to look after the wounded. I returned to Gideon Carter, who was lying on his face, and saw him die. His face was so marred and disfigured with wounds and blood that I did not recognize him then, but learned afterward that we had mistaken him for one of the enemy and left him on the ground in mistake. I next found David Patton, who a few minutes previously I had seen fall. He could speak, but was lying on his side, pale and almost dying, a ball having pierced the lower part of his body. Many others were wounded, and some dangerously. The enemy had left their horses, saddles, camp and baggage in the confusion of the fight. We harnessed some of their horses and placed them before a wagon, arranged blankets therein, on which we laid those who were not able to mount a horse. This done, our whole troop mounted the horses we had taken and formed in front and rear of the wagon which bore the wounded. We then moved slowly back to the guard and horses we had left. Here we halted and readjusted the wounded. It was an awful sight to see them pale and helpless, to hear their groans. There were about 6 of our men wounded, and 1 left dead on the ground. The enemy suffered a similar loss. Besides their camp and many of their arms and military stores. We ascertained from the prisoners whom we rescued that the enemy consisted of about 60 marauders headed by a Methodist preacher named Bogart. Our posse, which had actually engaged, could not have been more than 50. At the commencement of the engagement, there were 3 of our fellow citizens held as prisoners in their camp. They had been kidnapped from their peaceful homes the day previous. 2 of these made their escape at the commencement of the engagement. The 3rd was shot through the body in attempting to run to our lines, but fortunately he recovered. Having now arranged everything to the best advantage for the wounded, we made slowly on toward far west. When we came within 5 miles of the city, our express had reached there with the news of the battle, and we were met by a surgeon and others for our relief. Among those who met us here was the wife of the pale and dying Patton. Our wounded were now taken into a house and their wounds dressed. As Mrs. Patton entered the room and cast her eyes upon the pale and ghastly features of her husband, she burst into tears, exclaiming, "Oh God, my husband, how pale you look." He was still able to speak, but he died that evening in the triumphs of faith. The young Abanion also died about the same time. The others recovered of their wounds, but one of them, named Hendricks, is still a cripple. Patton and O'Banion were buried together under military honors. A whole people, as it were, followed them to the grave. All wept, whose feelings were not too intense to find vent in tears. He was the only member of the quorum of the 12 who had as yet found a martyr's grave. He was a great and good man, and one who chose to lay down his life for the cause of truth and right. For this privilege he had diligently sought and prayed, for, said he, I had rather die than live to see it thus in my country. But to return to the main thread of my narrative, having conveyed the wounded to their place of hospitality, the posse hastened to Far West and delivered the spoils of the enemy to the colonel of the regiment, who afterward delivered them to the higher civil or military authorities of the state. These several defeats of the insurrectionists in Daviess County, as well as in Caldwell County, checked for a time their ruinous ravages. They saw that it was impossible to conquer a people who were fighting for their homes, their wives and children, as well as for their country and conscience, unless they could come against them with some show of authority, for it had become as an established fact that the people of the saints never resisted authority, however abused. The next exertion of the enemy was to spread lies and falsehoods of the most alarming character. All our acts of defense were construed into insurrection, treason, murder, and plunder. In short, the public was deceived by bigotry, priestcraft, and a corrupt press, and made to look upon our acts of defense precisely as they would look upon the same acts performed without cause or provocation upon peaceable citizens. Murderous gangs were construed into peaceable militia in the state service, and to resist them was, on the part of the saints, murder, treason, and robbery, and finally the whole was treated abroad as the Mormon insurrection, Mormon war. And as if this were not enough, parties set fire to their own houses or that of their neighbors, and then laid it to the saints. Whole neighborhoods were falsely alarmed, or rather really alarmed, by the doings of these bandits, and in their fright they fled to more distant places of security and clamored loudly to the state authorities for protection from the Mormons, whom they represented as burning, plundering, and destroying all before them, while they were simply standing on their own ground and maintaining the defense, and this to the last extreme, and not till they were abandoned by every department of the state government. This flame was greatly assisted by several dissenters from the church, through fear or for love of power and gain. These dissenters became even more false, hardened, and bloodthirsty than those who had never known the way of righteousness. Many of them joined the enemy and were leaders in all manner of lying, murder, and plunder. The governor and ex-mobber Lilburn W. Boggs, who had long sought some opportunity to destroy us and drive us from the state, now ensured an order for some 10,000 troops to be mustered into service and marched to the field against the Mormons. He gave the command of this formidable force to General Clark, who lived perhaps 150 miles or more from the scene of trouble. The order was expressly to exterminate the Mormons or drive them from the state. It said nothing of criminals. It made no allusion to punishing crime and protecting innocence. It was sufficient to be called a Mormon, a peaceable family just immigrating or passing through the country, a missionary going or coming on his peaceable errand of mercy, an aged soldier or an aged soldier of the American Revolution on his deathbed or leaning on his staff in the chimney corner, a widow with her babes, the tender wife or helpless orphan, all were included in this order of wholesale extermination or banishment. It was enough that they believed as Mormon did, or that they were members of the Church of the Saints. So did the order read, and so was construed by the officers and soldiers entrusted with its execution. On the other hand, all the bandits, murderers, robbers, thieves, and house burners who had mobbed our people for the 5 years previous were now converted into orderly, loyal, patriotic state militia and mustered into service under pay, or suffered to murder people of every age and sex and plunder them on their own hook wherever they chose, provided they were considered Mormons. While General Clark was mustering his forces for this wholesale murder and treason, Major General D. Lucas and Brigadier General Moses Wilson, who were well known as the old leaders of the former outrages in Jackson County under this same Boggs, being nearer the scene of action and wishing to share the plunder and immortalize their names, put themselves at the head of all the old mobbers of Jackson County they could muster, and all those bandits who had more lately infested the counties of Carroll, Davies, and Caldwell, and such other militia as they could muster, and marched directly for the city of Far West, where they arrived while General Clark and his forces were several days' journey from the scene of action. The army of Lucas, thus mustered and marched, consisted of some 3,000 or 4,000 men. In the meantime, the governor's orders and these military movements were kept an entire secret from the citizens of Caldwell and Davies, who were suffering all this oppression from lawless outrages. Even the mail was withheld from Far West, and we had only heard that large bodies of armed men were approaching from the south, and we had sent 150 men with a flag of truth to make inquiries. While they were absent on this mission, an alarm came to town that the whole county to the south was filled with armed men who were murdering, plundering, and taking peaceful citizens prisoners in their own houses. On the receipt of this intelligence, every man fled to arms for the protection of our city. It was now toward evening, and we had heard nothing from the reconnoitering company who went south in the morning. While we stood in our armor, gazing to the south in anxious suspense, we beheld an army of cavalry with a long train of baggage wagons advancing over the hill at 2 miles distance. At first, we conjectured it might be our little troop with a flag of truce, but we soon saw that there were thousands of them. Our next thought that it might be some friendly troops sent for our protection, and then again we thought it might be a concentration of all the bandit forces combined for our destruction. At all events, there was no time to be lost, for although our forces then present did not exceed 500 men, yet we did not intend that they should enter the town without giving some account of themselves. We accordingly marched out upon the plains of the south of the city and formed in order of battle. Our line of infantry extended nearly half a mile. A small company of horses was posted on our right wing on a commanding eminence, and another small company in the rear of our main body, intended as a kind of reserve. By this time the sun was near setting, and the advance of the unknown army had come within plain view, at less than 1 mile distant. On seeing our forces presenting a small but formidable front, they came to a halt and forged along the borders of a stream called Goose Creek. The parties sent out a white flag, which met between the armies. Our messenger demanded to know who they were and what were their intentions. The reply was, "We want 3 persons out of the city before we massacre the rest." This was a very alarming and unexpected answer, but they were soon prevailed on to suspend hostilities till morning, by which time we were in hopes to receive some further and more satisfactory information. The enemy, under the command of Major General D. Lucas of Jackson County mob memory, then commenced their encampment for the night. Our troops continued under arms during the night. The company of 150 soon returned from the south, informing us that they had been hemmed in by the enemy during the day and only escaped by their superior knowledge of the ground. We also sent an express to Davies County, and by morning were reinforced by quite a number of troops under the command of Colonel L. White. In the meantime, a noted company of bandits under the command of Cornelius Gillam, who had long infested our borders and been notorious for their murders and daring robberies, and who painted themselves as Indian warriors, came pouring in from the west to strengthen the company of the enemy. Another company of murderers came in from Carroll County and was taken in the ranks of Lucas, after murdering some 18 or 20 of our citizens, men, women, and children at Hans Mill. Another company of murderers came in from Carroll County and was taken into the ranks of Lucas, after murdering some 18 or 20 of our citizens, men, women, and children at Hans Mill, of which particulars will be given hereafter. Thus both parties were considered reinforced during the night, the citizens of Far West being determined, if attacked, to defend their homes, wives, and children to the last. Spent the night in throwing up a temporary breastwork of building timber, logs, rails, floor etiquette. In the morning, the south side of the city was thus fortified, and also a considerable portion of the east and west, the whole line extending 1.5 miles.